Hospitals are filled with the worst kind of hypocrisy. People spend decades ignoring their health and their families only to show up here demanding miracles and pretending to be saints. I am Dr. Jennifer Davis, and I stopped believing in miracles the day my parents skipped my medical school graduation to watch my brother play minor league baseball. They chose a game over my life. Now my father is dying on a gurney, and they are demanding the best surgeon in the state. They have no idea that the best surgeon is the daughter they forgot. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Let us go back to the moment the past walked through my sterile doors. St. Jude's Hospital has a specific rhythm, a heartbeat composed of beeping monitors, squeaking rubber soles, and the hushed, urgent whispers of decisions that determine life or death. At 29 years old, Dr. Jennifer Davis did not just march to that rhythm, I conducted it. As the newly appointed chief of surgery, the youngest in the state's history, I walked the pristine, sterile corridors of the cardiac wing with a posture that had been forged in the fires of sleep deprivation and relentless ambition. My white coat was starched to perfection. My name badge sat straight against my lapel, and my hands, the tools of my trade, were steady. To the nurses and residents who parted like the Red Sea as I approached, I was a monolith of professional excellence. They saw the accolades, the framed degrees in my office, and the surgical records that bordered on the miraculous. They did not see the scar tissue wrapped around my own heart, a hardening of the spirit that was necessary to survive the silence of my personal life. I preferred it that way. In this building, biology made sense. Valves opened and closed. Blood pumped. If something broke, I fixed it. Outside these walls, the mechanics of human connection were far messier, and I had long ago decided to stop trying to repair the irreparable. It was a Tuesday afternoon, usually a time for administrative catch-up before evening rounds, when the armor I wore so carefully was pierced by something as trivial as a smell. I was passing the public waiting area near the elevators, reviewing a chart on a tablet, when the scent drifted over the partition. It was the distinct cloying odor of stadium nachos, that artificial neon orange cheese and stale corn chips. A young father was sharing a tray with his son, laughing about a foul ball. I froze in the middle of the hallway, my grip tightening on the tablet, until my knuckles turned white. That smell didn't belong here in the sanctuary of modern medicine. It belonged to humid summer nights, dusty bleachers, and the specific crushing weight of a promise broken. In an instant, the gleaming floors of St. Jude's dissolved, and I was transported back 5 years to a day that was supposed to be the pinnacle of my young life. The flashback hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was standing in the wings of the university auditorium, the heavy velvet of the graduation gown clinging to my neck in the sweltering May heat. I remembered the buzzing energy of the other medical students around me, a sea of black caps and bright futures. We were about to take the Hippocratic Oath. We were about to become doctors. For weeks, I had choreographed this moment in my mind. I had sent the tickets months in advance. I had called my parents 3 times the week before to confirm the parking directions. "We wouldn't miss it, Jenny," my father had said, his voice booming with a joviality that I desperately wanted to believe. "Your brother has a game, but he's sitting this one out. It's your day." My mother had echoed him, promising a celebratory dinner at the Italian place I loved. I had clung to those promises like a lifeline. Throughout my childhood, the orbit of our family had revolved entirely around Tyler. Tyler's batting average, Tyler's scouts, Tyler's minor league prospects. I was the studious shadow, the one who got straight A's and quietly kept the peace, while they chased the dream of a professional baseball career that always seemed just out of reach. But this was medical school. This was different. I remembered stepping onto the stage as my name was called. Jennifer Marie Davis, Doctor of Medicine. The applause was polite standard. I scanned the audience, squinting against the blinding stage lights. I knew exactly where they were supposed to be, row G seats 12 and 13. I found the row. I counted the seats. My heart hammered against my ribs loud enough to drown out the dean's voice. Empty. They were empty. not just occupied by strangers vacant, a gaping hole in the crowd where my validation was supposed to be. I accepted my diploma with a mechanical smile, shaking hands with people whose faces were a blur, and walked off the stage. I didn't go back to my seat. I went straight to the side exit, pulling my phone from the pocket of my gown. There was a single text message from my mother. It was a photo. In it, my father and mother were grinning, wearing matching team caps, holding trays of those distinct orange cheese nachos. In the background, the scoreboard lights blurred in the dusk. The caption read, "Tyler got put in for extra innings, coach needs him, can't leave now. Congrats though, we'll make it up to you." I stood in the alley behind the auditorium. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, muting the ceremony inside. I stared at the phone until the screen went dark. They hadn't just been late, they hadn't come at all. A minor league game, not even the majors, just another dusty scrap for glory in a dying town, had taken precedence over the culmination of 8 years of grueling academic labor. It wasn't the absence that broke me. It was the hierarchy. I finally understood with a clarity that cut like a scalpel that I would never be the priority. I could cure cancer, and they would still ask about Tyler's batting average. I slid down the brick wall, burying my face in my hands, not weeping, but hyperventilating, gasping for air, as the reality of my solitude set in. "Pull yourself together, girl." The voice was sharp, gravelly. I looked up to see a woman standing there lighting a cigarette. It was Nurse Margaret, a terrifyingly efficient woman from the university hospital where I had done my rotations. She was older, with steel gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. She had seen me at my best during rounds, and now she was seeing me at my absolute lowest. I tried to stand to apologize to hide the shame of being unloved. Margaret didn't offer pity. She didn't coo or hug me. She took a drag of her cigarette, exhaled a plume of blue smoke, and handed me a rough brown paper napkin from her pocket. "Family let you down?" she asked. Not really a question. I nodded, unable to speak. Margaret stomped out her cigarette with the heel of her sensible orthopedic shoe. She looked me dead in the eye, her expression fierce and unyielding. "Then you don't need them. Tears don't pay the rent, and they certainly don't save lives. You have a gift, Davis. Use it." She turned to go back inside, pausing only to deliver the line that would become my mantra. "Success is the best revenge, dear. Make them regret the day they looked away." The memory faded as the elevator dinged in the present day, pulling me back to St. Jude's. I blinked, clearing the sudden moisture from my eyes. The smell of nachos was still there, but it no longer held power over me. I looked at my reflection in the elevator doors. I was not that weeping girl in the alley anymore. I was Dr. Davis. I had taken Margaret's advice to the letter. I had worked every holiday, picked up every difficult case, and published papers that were cited globally. I had built a life of immaculate order and high achievement. I had no contact with my parents or Tyler. I didn't know if he ever made the majors, I assumed not, or I would have seen it on the news. I didn't know if my parents were healthy or happy. I simply didn't care. Or so I told myself. I had replaced family with the hospital staff, love with respect and warmth, with the cold, hard satisfaction of being the best. I straightened my spine, adjusted my stethoscope, and stepped onto the elevator. I was safe here. I was in control. Whatever chaos existed in the world outside in here, I was the law. And nothing from my past could touch me. The calm of the elevator ride was shattered the moment the doors slid open on the surgical floor. The overhead paging system, usually a rhythmic drone of routine announcements, barked with a staccato urgency that sent a jolt of adrenaline through the hallway. "Code Blue Trauma Bay 1, Surgical Consult Stat, Dr. Davis to Trauma 1. The request was specific. They weren't asking for the on-call attending, they were asking for me by name. I didn't running in a hospital induces panic, but I lengthened my stride into a power walk, my white coat billowing behind me like a cape. A nurse, Sarah, fell into step beside me, thrusting a tablet into my hands before I could even ask for the vitals. Male 62, airlifted from the stadium district. Massive chest pain, unequal pulses, hypotension. CT confirms a type A aortic dissection with retrograde extension. It's a mess, doctor. The aortic root is practically shredded. I scanned the imaging on the screen as we moved, my brain shifting instantly from the philosophical musings of the elevator to the cold, hard geometry of anatomy. A type A dissection was a catastrophic event. The inner layer of the aorta tears, causing blood to surge through the tear and separate the layers of the vessel wall. It is a ticking time bomb where the timer is measured in minutes, not hours. But Sarah had mentioned retrograde extension, which complicated things exponentially. This wasn't a standard repair. This required a valve-sparing root replacement, a technique that demanded a level of dexterity and speed that few surgeons possessed. It was the procedure I had modified and perfected during my fellowship, the very technique that had earned me the nickname, the Weaver, among the residents. It was the Davis procedure, though I rarely called it that aloud. Prep or one. I ordered, my voice flat and commanding. Get the perfusion team ready for deep hypothermic circulatory arrest. I want ice on the head. We have maybe 20 minutes before that aorta ruptures completely. There's a problem, Chief, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper as we approached the double doors of the trauma bay. She looked flustered, which was unlike her. The family, they forced their way in. Security is on the way, but they're refusing to leave the patient's side until they speak to the head honcho. They're screaming about lawsuits and VIP treatment. Dr. Evans tried to calm them down and the sun nearly took a swing at him. I stopped fast, my rubber soles chirping against the linoleum. They assaulted a doctor. Verbal assault mostly, but aggressive. They're demanding the best doctor in the state. They said, and I quote, "We don't want any residents touching him." I felt a muscle in my jaw twitch. The entitlement of the terrified was nothing new, but physical intimidation of my staff was a line I did not allow anyone to cross. "I'll handle it," I said, adjusting my surgical mask so it sat high on the bridge of my nose, effectively concealing everything but my eyes. I pulled my surgical cap down tight. I was no longer Jennifer. I was the chief. I pushed through the doors of Trauma Bay 1 and walked into a wall of noise. The rhythmic whooshing of the ventilator and the shrill alarm of the cardiac monitor were being drowned out by a woman's shrieking voice. "I don't care what the protocol is. Do you know who we are? We have platinum insurance. Get me someone who knows what they're doing." I stepped into the room, my presence usually enough to silence a crowd, but the woman didn't even look at me. She was gripping the rail of the gurney, her knuckles white, her face a mask of smeared mascara and terror-fueled rage. It took my brain a fraction of a second to process the visual data, to overlay the aged, frantic face in front of me with the memory of the woman who had smiled in a text message 5 years ago. It was my mother. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sterile lights of the trauma bay flared brighter, searing the image into my retinas. She looked older, the lines around her mouth etched deeper by years of what I assumed was stress, though she was still trying to maintain the facade of a suburban matriarch with her dyed blonde hair and heavy jewelry. And there, leaning against the supply cart with his arms crossed, was Tyler. The golden boy, the minor league prospect. He looked nothing like the athlete I remembered. His jawline had softened into jowls, and his stomach pressed tight against a faded baseball jersey that looked 2 sizes too small. He looked tired, washed up, and angry at the inconvenience of his father's mortality. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice muffled slightly by the mask, unrecognizable in its professional detachment. "I am the chief of surgery. You need to step back." "Finally!" my mother shouted, spinning around to face me. She didn't see me. She saw a white coat. She saw a badge that said Chief of Surgery. She saw a servant she could command. "Are you the best?" They told me to ask for the best. "My husband is dying. He needs the best doctor in the state, not some student." She gestured wildly at Dr. Evans, who was checking the femoral line. I looked past her, down at the patient. My father. He was intubated, his skin the color of ash, his chest rising and falling with the mechanical hiss of the ventilator. He looked small. The man who had loomed so large over my childhood, whose approval I had chased like a mirage, was now just a collection of failing organs on a striker gurney. I picked up the chart at the foot of the bed. Patient name Robert Davis. I had been so focused on the anatomy that I hadn't even processed the name on the tablet earlier. Davis was a common name. There were 3 other Davises in the cardiac wing right now, but this was Robert. Jen, hey, Doc. Tyler stepped forward, his voice a mixture of arrogance and panic. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? He hadn't looked me in the eyes since I was 18. To him, I was just another obstacle to management. Look, we're not trying to be difficult, but my dad, he's important. We need a private suite for recovery, and we need to know you've done this before. We don't want any screw-ups. The irony was a bitter pill that stuck in my throat. They were demanding the best doctor in the state to save the man who had skipped that doctor's graduation to watch a baseball game that didn't matter. They were abusing the staff of the very hospital where I had built my empire. I looked at the monitors. His blood pressure was tanking. 70/40. The dissection was progressing. If I walked away, if I recused myself right now, I would be within my rights. Ethical guidelines stated that doctors should not operate on immediate family. I could step back. I could let Dr. Evans take this. Evans was a good surgeon, competent and steady. But Evans didn't know the Davis procedure like I did. Evans hadn't spent 3 years refining the suture technique to minimize cross-clamp time. If Evans did this surgery, the mortality risk was 40%. If I did it, it was 5. I looked at my father's unconscious face. If I let Evans operate and my father died, it wouldn't be murder. It would just be nature taking its course. It would be justice. Doctor, my mother snapped, her voice cracking. Are you listening to me? Can you save him? I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the fear behind the entitlement. I saw a woman who had bet everything on a son who had failed to launch, and who was now terrified of losing the husband who supported them. The silence in the room stretched thin, vibrating with the tension of the unseen. Nurse Margaret had told me that success was the best revenge. Letting him die wasn't success. It was weakness. It was allowing their neglect to turn me into something lesser. If I saved him, I wasn't just doing my job. I was proving definitively and irrefutably that I was greater than they were. I would save him not because he deserved it, but because I was excellent. I would grant him a life he owed entirely to the daughter he forgot. I made my choice. I am listening, I said, my voice turning to steel. I didn't pull down the mask. I didn't offer a hug. I gripped the clipboard with the authority of a judge handing down a sentence. I have reviewed the scans. Your husband has a type A aortic dissection. It is fatal without immediate intervention. I am the only surgeon in this hospital qualified to perform the specific repair he needs. My mother let out a sob of relief, clutching Tyler's arm. Thank God. Thank God. Do it, please. I will, I said. I handed the chart back to Sarah, my movements precise. But you need to understand the terms. Once I step into that operating room, I am in absolute command. You will clear this trauma bay immediately. You will sit in the waiting room, and you will treat my staff with the respect they deserve. If I hear one more word of abuse directed at any nurse or resident, I will have security remove you from the building while I am operating. Do you understand? Tyler bristled, stepping forward as if to challenge me, but my mother yanked him back. She nodded frantically. Yes, yes, of course. Anything. Just save him. Get them out, I said to the security guard who had just arrived. I didn't look back at them. Sarah, get him to OR1. I'm scrubbing in. I turned on my heel and walked out of the trauma bay. My heart was pounding a thunderous drum in my ears, but my hands were steady. I was about to hold my father's heart in my palms. I was about to repair the very thing that was broken in this family, and they had no idea who I was. Not yet. The holding area outside the operating theaters was a transitional purgatory, a place of hushed tones, shivering bodies under thin blankets, and the stark fluorescent reality of imminent mortality. I walked in my surgical cap, already on a blue mask dangling around my neck. I held the clipboard against my chest like a shield. My father Robert was drifting in and out of consciousness, the heavy pre-op sedatives beginning to fog his mind. My mother stood by his head, stroking his hair with a trembling hand, while Tyler paced the small cubicle checking his phone. They looked small. They looked ordinary. They looked nothing like the giants who had defined the landscape of my childhood insecurities. "We need to move him now," the anesthesiologist Dr. Liu said softly, looking at me for the cue. "The dissection is unstable." I stepped into the light of the cubicle. "Wait," I said. My mother looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. She was about to launch into another tirade about demanding the best, about ensuring her husband was treated like a king, but the words died in her throat. She stared at me. Without the mask covering my face, there was nowhere for them to hide from the truth. She took in the high cheekbones, the set of the jaw, the eyes that were mirror images of the man lying on the gurney. "Jennifer," she whispered. The name came out like a question foreign and clumsy on her tongue. Tyler stopped pacing. He squinted at me, his mouth falling open. "Jen? No way." "I told you I would be your surgeon," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was a biological mechanic. "I am Dr. Davis, and I am the only one who can save him." The shock that rippled through them was visceral. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. For a second I saw a flicker of something that might have been shame, a flash of the graduation ceremony, the empty seats, the silence of 5 years. But just as quickly it was replaced by a desperate, grasping hope. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed, reaching out as if to grab my arm. I took a precise half-step back, keeping the sterile distance. "Jenny, honey, I didn't know they said Dr. Davis, and I never— I mean, look at you. You're the chief. Jen." Tyler's shock morphed instantly into a grin that made my stomach turn. It was the grin of a man who just realized he held a winning lottery ticket. He stepped forward, invading my personal space with the confidence of the golden child who had never been told no. "This is insane." I told Mom, I said, "Imagine if Jen works here." "Look, this is perfect. You can tell these nurses to back off. Get Dad the VIP suite, right? The one with the view. And hey, I parked in the garage. Can you validate that? It's $40 a day." The audacity was breathtaking. My father was minutes away from his aorta shredding inside his chest, and Tyler was worried about parking validation. He didn't see me. He didn't see the woman who had clawed her way up from the bottom of a deep well of loneliness. He saw a connection. He saw a hookup. He saw an extension of himself that he could use. I looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and let the silence stretch until his grin faltered. "My patient is critical," I said, my voice ice cold. "I am not your sister right now. I am the chief of surgery, and if you delay me by another 10 seconds, your father dies." I turned to Dr. Liu. "Take him." "Jen, wait," Tyler started, but the orderlies were already moving. "That's Dr. Davis to you," I said over my shoulder. I didn't look back to see their faces. I snapped my mask up, covering the Jennifer they thought they knew, and pushed through the double doors into the sterile corridor. The transition into Operating Room 1 was a ritual I cherished. The air was colder here, filtered and pressurized. The lights were brighter, casting no shadows. I moved to the scrub sink, turning on the water with my knee. I scrubbed my hands and forearms with the rough sponge, the scent of chlorhexidine filling my nose. Methodical, rhythmic, clean. With every stroke of the brush, I scoured away the anger. Anger made hands shake. Resentment made judgment cloudy. I needed to be a machine. I entered the OR holding my dripping hands up. A scrub nurse stepped forward with a sterile towel. I dried off, then thrust my arms into the gown held open for me. As I snapped my gloves on, double-gloved for safety, I looked across the patient. The head nurse was prepping the drape. It was Margaret. Of course it was Margaret. She was the senior-most nurse on the floor, the Iron Lady of St. Jude's. She paused, her eyes locking onto mine over her mask. She looked down at the patient's face, which was now exposed amidst the blue drapes, and then back at the chart. Robert Davis. She looked at me. I saw the gears turning in her mind. She remembered the weeping girl in the alley behind the auditorium. She remembered the nachos. She remembered the empty seats. Her eyes widened slightly. She knew exactly whose chest I was about to crack open. Doctor, Margaret said, her voice steady but laced with a new profound gravity. We are prepped and ready. Thank you, Margaret, I said. Scalpel. She slapped the handle into my palm. It was a solid weight, a familiar extension of my will. I looked down at the iodine-stained skin of my father's chest. This was the chest I had rested my head against as a toddler. This was the heart that had beaten with pride for Tyler's home runs and beaten with indifference for my honor roll report cards. Time out, I announced to the room. Patient is Robert Davis. Procedure is valve-sparing aortic root replacement with arch reconstruction. Allergies penicillin. Antibiotics are on board. Everyone ready. A chorus of ready echoed around the room. Knife, I whispered. I made the incision. A clean, straight line down the center of the sternum. The smell of cauterized flesh rose up acrid, distinctive. It was the smell of salvation, but today it smelled like memory. I took the sternal saw. The high-pitched whine filled the room. I divided the breastbone. I placed the retractor and cranked it open. There it was, the mediastinum, the heart. It was enlarged, struggling. The aorta was a deep, angry purple bulging dangerously. It looked like a bruised plum ready to burst. Heparinize, I ordered. Cannulate for bypass. The next hour was a blur of high-velocity trauma management. We connected him to the heart-lung machine. Go on bypass, I commanded. The perfusionist acknowledged. The machine whirred to life, taking over the job of keeping Robert Davis alive. His heart, empty of blood, collapsed and stopped beating. I stared at it for a second. A still heart. I held his life entirely in my hands. If I made a mistake, if I nicked a coronary artery, if I didn't seat the valve perfectly, he would never wake up. He would die on this table, and my mother and Tyler would be left with nothing. The thought drifted through my mind like a ghost. It would be so easy to fail. Just a tremor of the hand, a moment of hesitation. They would never know. They would blame fate. But then I looked up and met Margaret's eyes. She was watching me not with suspicion but with a fierce protective intensity. She knew the power I held. She knew the temptation of the aggrieved. And she was daring me to be better. Success is the best revenge. I took a breath. Cross clamp on, cardioplegia going in. Let's cool him down to 18 degrees. I began the Davis procedure. It was a complex dance of reconstruction. I had to excise the diseased aortic tissue while sparing the aortic valve, a delicate structure of 3 thin leaflets. Most surgeons would just replace the whole thing with a mechanical valve, condemning the patient to a lifetime of blood thinners. But I was better than most surgeons. I carefully dissected the root, liberating the coronary arteries, the tiny vessels that fed the heart itself. As I sutured, my internal monologue began to detach from the medicine. I was sewing with a 4-0 Proline, a thread finer than human hair. Stitch, turn, knot. This is for the ballet recitals you missed. Stitch. This is for the science fair where I won first place and you asked why I didn't play softball. Turn. This is for the graduation. Knot. The silence in the OR was absolute. The residents were leaning in, watching the monitors, awestruck by the speed and precision of my hands. I wasn't just fixing him. I was reconstructing him. I was giving him a better heart than the one nature had provided. I was giving him a heart capable of surviving, even if it wasn't capable of loving me the way I needed. Replanting the right coronary artery, I announced. My hands moved with a fluidity that felt almost divine. I was in the zone, that flow state where time dissolves. I wasn't angry anymore. I was cold. I was excellent. I was a god in a surgical gown. Margaret passed me the instruments before I even asked for them. She was in sync with me. She anticipated every move. When I hit a tricky patch of calcified tissue, she had the rongeurs ready. When a bleeder started near the arch, she had the suction there instantly. We were a team united by the secret knowledge of who this man was and what he had done. "Warm him up," I said finally. "Release the cross clamp." This was the moment of truth. The blood rushed back into the reconstructed heart. We watched the monitor, a flat line, then a flutter, then a strong rhythmic spike. Thump thump, thump thump, sinus rhythm. Perfect. "Coming off bypass," I said. "Check the echo." The transesophageal echo on the screen showed a perfectly reconstructed aortic root. No leaks. The valve was opening and closing beautifully. It was a masterpiece. I stripped off my bloody gloves and stepped back from the table. The residents were breathing sighs of relief. "Close him up," I told Dr. Evans. "Standard sternal wires, subcuticular stitch on the skin. Make it pretty." I walked over to the computer to type my operative note. Margaret followed me, pulling down her mask. Her face was stern, but her eyes were shining. She leaned in close so only I could hear. "I saw them," she murmured, her voice low and rough. "In the waiting room, acting like they owned the place, treating the triage nurse like a servant." I kept typing, my eyes on the screen. "I'm sure they did." "You did a perfect job, Doctor," Margaret said. "Better than he deserved." I stopped typing and looked at her. "He didn't deserve my skill, Margaret, but I deserved to show it." Margaret nodded, a slow, grim acknowledgement of the victory I had just won. "Dr. Evans is taking the closure. You know the family is waiting for you. They've been asking the desk every 10 minutes if Jen is done." "Let them wait," I said. "And Margaret?" "Yes, Chief. When I go out there, I need you to handle the transfer orders. I'm putting him in the ICU, but I'm assigning Dr. Evans as the attending physician for post-op." Margaret's eyebrows shot up. "You're recusing ethical guidelines?" I said, a thin, sharp smile touching my lips. "Immediate family. I can't be objective in his recovery. Dr. Evans is rigorous. He follows the rule book. No special treatment, no bending the policies." Margaret's smile matched mine, a terrifying expression of shared understanding. She knew Dr. Evans. He was a brilliant doctor, but he had the bedside manner of a drill sergeant. He despised entitled patients. "I'll make sure Dr. Evans knows exactly who they are," Margaret said. "And I'll be overseeing the nursing rotation personally. We run a tight ship in the ICU. Strict visiting hours. One visitor at a time. No outside food." "Perfect," I said. I hit sign on the operative report. "I'm going to go tell them he's alive." I turned back to the window, looking into the OR. My father was being stitched up, his chest rising and falling. I had saved his life, and in doing so, I had earned the right to walk away from it. The surgery was the easy part. The reckoning was about to begin. The transition from the operating room to the waiting area was a journey between two distinct worlds. Inside the OR, I was a deity, a master of physiology commanding life and death with a scalpel. Outside, in the fluorescent-lit corridor leading to the surgical waiting room, I was just Jennifer. Or rather, I was the Jennifer my family expected to see, the daughter who sought approval, the sister who stood in the shadow. But as I stripped off my surgical gown and dropped it into the biohazard bin, I felt a heavy cold armor settle over me. I wasn't going out there to seek approval. I was going out there to deliver a verdict. I checked my reflection in the scrub room mirror. My face was impassive, my eyes dry. I put my white coat back on, buttoning it to the top. I smoothed the lapels, ensuring the chief of surgery embroidery was clearly visible. I picked up my tablet, took a deep breath of the sterile air, and pushed through the double doors. The waiting room was a chaotic mural of anxiety. Families huddled in clusters, clutching styrofoam coffee cups, staring blankly at the TV mounted in the corner. But the Davis family had carved out a territory. They had taken over a corner section of sofas meant for 3 different families. Tyler was sprawled across 2 seats, his legs stretched out into the walkway, talking loudly into his phone. My mother was pacing, wringing a tissue that looked remarkably like the one Nurse Margaret had given me 5 years ago. When the automatic doors whooshed open and I stepped through, the atmosphere in their corner shifted instantly. Tyler snapped his phone shut. My mother stopped pacing. For a heartbeat, there was silence. "Jen!" Tyler shouted, leaping up. He had the energy of a man who had just won a bet. "Is he? Did you do it?" My mother rushed forward, her arms open, tears streaming down her face. She looked ready to engulf me, to pull me into a hug that would erase 5 years of silence and pretend that we were a tight-knit unit who had just weathered a storm together. "Oh, Jenny, is he okay? Tell me he's okay." I stopped walking. I didn't step into the embrace. I didn't recoil physically, but I stopped with such precise professional distance that my mother hit an invisible wall. She faltered, her arms dropping awkwardly to her sides. "The surgery was successful," I said, my voice pitched to a perfect clinical mezzo piano. "The repair of the aortic root is complete. We were able to spare the valve, which means he will not require long-term anticoagulation therapy. His vitals are stable, and he is being transferred to the ICU as we speak." "Oh, thank God," my mother sobbed, collapsing back onto the sofa. "Thank God. I knew it. I told everyone. My daughter is the surgeon. I knew you'd save him." "That's our girl," Tyler said, grinning and clapping his hands together. He walked up to me, trying to sling an arm around my shoulder. I sidestepped him smoothly, leaving him embracing the air. "So look, Jen, since you're the boss, we need to talk about the room situation. That waiting room is a dump. We want Dad in the VIP wing, you know, the one the athletes use, and Mom needs a cot in the room. A real bed, not those chairs." I looked at Tyler. He was so confident, so sure that his proximity to me was a currency he could spend. "About that," I said, tapping the screen of my tablet, "there are some procedural updates we need to discuss." Right. Tyler waved his hand dismissal. "Whatever paperwork. Just get us the suite." "Mr. Davis," I said, using his surname. The shock on his face was immediate. "St. Jude's Hospital operates under strict ethical guidelines, specifically Bylaw 4.2 Section C regarding conflict of interest." I looked from him to my mother. "It is a violation of medical ethics for a physician to manage the post-operative care of an immediate family member. It compromises objectivity." My mother frowned, wiping her eyes. I don't understand. You just operated on him." "That was an emergency," I explained calmly. "Under Good Samaritan protocols, and due to the specialized nature of the procedure, I was permitted to perform the life-saving intervention. However, now that the patient is stable, the emergency has passed. Therefore, I am recusing myself." "Recusing?" Tyler asked, the grin sliding off his face. "What does that mean?" "It means I am no longer his doctor," I said. "I have transferred his care to the on-call intensivist." But you're the chief," my mother stammered. "You can do whatever you want. We want you." "I cannot," I lied smoothly. "I could have kept the case if I wanted to fight for it, but I didn't want to. And frankly, I wouldn't be able to give him the unbiased attention he needs." I gestured to the hallway behind me. "Please meet Dr. Evans. He will be taking over Robert's care immediately." Dr. Evans stepped through the doors on cue. He was a brilliant physician, a man I had handpicked for the fellowship program because of his obsessive attention to detail and his absolute lack of tolerance for nonsense. He was rigid, humorless, and followed the hospital rulebook as if it were religious scripture. He adjusted his glasses and looked at my family with the expression of an accountant reviewing a tax audit. "Mrs. Davis, Mr. Davis," Dr. Evans said, not offering a hand. "I am Dr. Evans. I have reviewed the chief's operative notes. The surgery was flawless. Now the recovery begins, and recovery is about discipline." "Hi, Doc," Tyler said, trying to recover his swagger. "Look, we were just telling Jen about the room. We need the private suite." "Private suites are reserved for transplant isolation cases and infectious disease protocols," Dr. Evans said, his voice flat. "Your father is in the cardiac ICU Bay 4. It is a shared unit. It allows for better nursing visibility." Shared, my mother gasped. With, with strangers. But he needs quiet. He needs privacy. He needs constant monitoring, Dr. Evans corrected. And regarding visitation, ICU hours are strictly 10:00 a.m. to 12:00 p.m. and 4:00 p.m. to 6:00 p.m., 2 visitors maximum at a time. No overnight stays. What? Tyler barked. That's ridiculous. My sister runs this place, Jen, tell him. They both looked at me. This was the moment, the pivot point. They expected me to override my subordinate to snap my fingers and conjure luxury out of thin air because they were my family. I looked at Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans is the attending physician. His word is final regarding patient management. I do not interfere with my staff's clinical judgment. Jen. My mother stood up, her voice rising to a screech. He is your father. You can't leave him with him. We need to be with him. Those are the rules, I said softly. The same rules applied to every other family in this building. We aren't every other family, Tyler shouted, stepping close enough that Dr. Evans took a defensive step back. We're your family. Don't you remember who raised you? I remember exactly who raised me, I said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I remember a lot of things. Before Tyler could respond, a shadow fell over us. Nurse Margaret had arrived. She didn't walk. She marched. She was wearing her navy blue scrubs, arms crossed over her chest, her face a mask of terrifying authority. She stepped between Tyler and me, acting as a physical barrier. Is there a problem here? Margaret asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of 40 years of nursing. This nurse, Tyler sneered, pointing at Evans, then Margaret. They're trying to tell us we can't stay with my dad. Tell them who we are. Margaret smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Oh, I know exactly who you are, she said. She looked at my mother, then at Tyler. I was there 5 years ago, May 14th, University Auditorium. My mother went still, her face drained of color. I was the one who found Dr. Davis crying in the alleyway behind the dumpsters because her parents couldn't be bothered to show up for her graduation. Margaret continued, her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. I remember the text message about the baseball game. Minor league, wasn't it? She turned her gaze to Tyler, looking him up and down with withering pity. Doesn't look like that worked out for you. Tyler opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked from Margaret to me, the realization dawning on him. You told them, my mother whispered, looking at me with horror. I didn't have to tell anyone, I said. People see things. People remember. Hospital policy is zero tolerance for abuse of staff, Margaret said, stepping closer to Tyler. You are shouting in a surgical waiting room. You are intimidating the attending physician. If I hear one more raised voice, I will have security escort you off the premises, and you will not be allowed back in until discharge. Do I make myself clear? Tyler looked at me, pleading now. Jen, you're gonna let her talk to us like that? I checked my watch. I have rounds to finish. Dr. Evans, he's all yours. Margaret, please ensure the ICU rules are followed to the letter. No exceptions. Understood, Chief, Margaret said. Jen, my mother cried out as I turned away. Jen, please, you can't just walk away. I paused at the door. I didn't turn around. You taught me that walking away is easy, Mom. You just have to have something better to do. I walked out. Behind me, I heard Tyler start to argue again, and I heard Margaret's voice cut him off with the sharpness of a whip. Sit down, now. I walked down the corridor, the sound of their desperation fading behind me. I felt lighter. The surgery had fixed my father's heart, but the recusal had fixed mine. They were trapped in the system now, a system designed to treat everyone equally, a concept they had never applied to their own children. They were in Dr. Evans' world now, and Dr. Evans didn't care about batting averages. They were just another chart number. And I was the ghost who signed the paperwork. 3 weeks later, the bill arrived. It wasn't the physical bill that caused the final fracture, but the realization of what it represented. In the American medical system, excellence comes at a premium, and while I had saved my father's life with the charity of my skill, I had not extended that charity to his finances. My office manager had processed the billing with standard efficiency. Out-of-network co-pays the cost of the specialized Davis procedure, the ICU residency, and the anesthesia fees. There were no professional courtesy discounts applied. I treated Robert Davis exactly as I would have treated any stranger who walked in off the street with impeccable medical care and a standard invoice. For a family that had leveraged their entire financial future on the gamble of a minor league baseball career that never paid out, the numbers on that paper were catastrophic. From the sanctuary of my office on the 4th floor, I watched the final act of their tragedy unfold through the glass of the atrium window overlooking the main lobby. It was a Tuesday, much like the day the smell of nachos had triggered this cascade of events. But today the air didn't smell like cheap cheese. It smelled like rain and justice. Down in the lobby, the situation had escalated rapidly. Tyler, frayed by weeks of sleeping in a motel chair and realizing that his parents' attention and wallet were now entirely consumed by medical recovery, had finally snapped. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was a 30-year-old man in a stained jersey screaming at the admissions clerk. I couldn't hear the words through the soundproof glass, but I didn't need to. I knew the cadence of his entitlement. He was waving a piece of paper, likely a rejection for a credit extension or a demand for a refund that didn't exist. He slammed his hand on the counter, a gesture of impotent rage. I saw the security guards move in. They weren't the jovial greeters. They were the tactical team. Tyler, fueled by a lifetime of never being told no, made the mistake of shoving one of them. It was a pathetic flailing motion, the last gasp of a bully who had lost his audience. The takedown was swift and professional. Within seconds, the brother who had been the son of my parents' universe was face down on the polished terrazzo floor, his hands cuffed behind his back. My office door opened. It was Margaret. She held a clipboard against her chest, her expression unreadable, though her eyes held a grim satisfaction. "Police are on the scene," she reported, her voice calm. "Assaulting hospital personnel, disorderly conduct, and they found a stolen prescription pad in his back pocket. Looks like he tried to lift it from a resident's cart earlier. He was trying to write himself scripts for oxycodone, probably to sell." I turned away from the window, the image of Tyler being hauled into a squad car burning into my mind. "And the parents?" "Devastated," Margaret said. "Your mother is in the room. She saw the arrest from the window. She's hysterical, but Dr. Evans has sedated her. Your father—" She paused, her voice softening slightly. "He's awake. He's sitting in the chair in the shared room. His roommate is a retired mechanic who loves talk radio. It's loud, it's cramped, it's exactly what the insurance pays for." "Did he say anything?" I asked, picking up a paperweight from my desk, a glass heart. "He asked for you," Margaret said. "He asked the nurse if his daughter was coming to say goodbye before discharge. The nurse, Sarah, the one Tyler yelled at, told him, 'The chief of surgery is busy saving lives, Mr. Davis. She doesn't have time for visitors.'" Margaret allowed a small, sharp smile to curve her lips. "He's been listening to the staff talk about you for 3 weeks, Jennifer. Every shift change he hears about the Davis procedure. He hears the residents worshiping the ground you walk on. He knows exactly who you are now, and he knows he can't reach you." It was a punishment more fitting than any scream or shout. My father, a man of pride, was forced to owe his life to the child he had discarded, while simultaneously being denied the ability to claim credit for her success. He was alive, yes, but he was irrelevant. He would go home to a house they might have to sell to pay the bills, with a son facing prison time and a criminal record that would permanently extinguish any flickering hope of a baseball career. They were leaving St. Jude's not as VIPs, but as a cautionary tale. "Thank you, Margaret," I said, placing the glass heart back on the desk, "for everything." "You did good work, Chief," she said, nodding once. "Success really is the best revenge, but freedom, that's the dessert." She left the office, closing the door softly. I stood alone in the silence. I looked around the room, the diplomas, the awards, the clean, orderly space I had built. It felt different now. It no longer felt like a fortress to keep people out. It felt like a launch pad. I walked to my desk and picked up the contract that had been sitting there for a week. It was an offer for a prestigious fellowship and lecture series in Zurich. 2 years in Europe teaching advanced aortic reconstruction. I had been hesitating and afraid to leave the safety of the kingdom I had built here. But now I realized I wasn't staying for the hospital. I had been staying because I was waiting for them. I had been waiting subconsciously for this very moment, for the chance to prove them wrong. Now that it was done, there was nothing keeping me here. I uncapped my pen and signed the document. Jennifer Davis, MD, fax. The ink was black and permanent. I packed my bag. I didn't take much: my laptop, my stethoscope, the framed photo of my medical school graduation, where I stood alone, smiling defiantly. I took the elevator down to the garage, bypassing the lobby, where the janitorial staff was mopping up the scuff marks from Tyler's arrest. The air outside was crisp, the rain having washed away the humidity. I unlocked my car, tossing my bag into the passenger seat. As I settled behind the wheel, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. The screen lit up. Mom. I stared at the name. I could imagine the voicemail she would leave. The weeping, the pleading, the sudden invocation of family now that they needed bail money and legal defense. She would ask how I could be so cold. She would ask for a loan. She would try to pull the strings of guilt that had been severed on the operating table. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound, airy lightness. I picked up the phone. I didn't answer it. I tapped the info icon. Block caller. Then I went to the contact list. Dad. Block caller. Tyler. Block caller. I dropped the phone back into the cup holder. I started the engine. The radio hummed to life, playing a song I didn't recognize, something upbeat and driving. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the garage, turning onto the main avenue. In the rearview mirror, the massive brick structure of St. Jude's receded, getting smaller and smaller, until it was just part of the skyline. Somewhere inside that building, 3 people were realizing that the bill had come due and they were bankrupt. I turned my eyes to the road ahead. The sun was breaking through the clouds in the west, painting the horizon in shades of gold and violet. I had a plane to catch. I had a life to live. And for the first time in 29 years, it was entirely, wonderfully mine. Sometimes the best way to heal a wound is to simply walk away and never look back. Jennifer definitely earned her freedom in the end. What did you think of her decision to block her family completely? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Ashes of Revenge. We'll see you next time.